Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at human behavior. It's going to be
Ooh,
fascinating.
I love this topic.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at all the factors that affect how we act and think and interact with each other.
It's amazing how complex it all is.
It really is. And get this, we're also going to be talking about how the way society is structured can actually encourage a more positive way of life. So,
Kind of like we're designing a society for happiness.
exactly like social architecture for a good life.
I love that.
And we've got some really cool sources to dig into for this one. We've got excerpts from psychology textbooks, some research studies on things like leadership and conformity.
Those are always fascinating.
They are, and even a little bit of evolutionary psychology, just to keep
Yeah.
things interesting.
Gotta have that evolutionary perspective.
Absolutely.
It's incredible how much our behavior is shaped by things we're not even aware of. Like we're constantly reacting to cues from our environment and from each other.
Yeah, it's like this invisible dance we're all doing.
Yeah. Exactly, a complex dance with so many steps.
So true. So to kind of break it all down, let's start with the field of social psychology.
Okay.
This field is all about how our thoughts, feelings, and actions are influenced by the people around us.
Right. And one of the big questions social psychology tries to answer is why we sometimes act so differently in groups than we would if we were alone.
It's like we become different people when we're in a crowd.
Yeah, why do we do things in a group setting that we might never consider doing on our own?
That reminds me of a really famous study, the Milgram experiment.
Oh, yeah, the one from Yale back in the 60s.
Yeah, 1961, and the results were pretty shocking. In this experiment, they had participants who thought they were part of a learning study, but they were actually instructed to deliver what they believed were electric shocks to another person
Oh, wow.
every time that person answered a question incorrectly.
And they thought the shocks were real.
They did. They were totally convinced. And of course, the shocks weren't actually real, but the participants didn't know that.
So they were willing to inflict pain on someone just because they were told to.
It's crazy, right? And what's even more disturbing is that many of them kept going even when they felt uncomfortable or even expressed concern.
That's wild. Just goes to show the power of authority.
It really does. Like people were willing to go against their own moral compass simply because an authority figure was telling them to.
Makes you wonder if we're all capable of that kind of blind obedience.
It really does. Have you ever felt that pressure to conform even when something felt wrong?
Absolutely. I think we all have at some point. That struggle between fitting in and staying true to yourself is a constant battle.
It's a universal human dilemma, for sure.
Mhm.
We all want to be accepted, but sometimes that desire to fit in can lead us to do things we might regret later.
So true. So we've established that other people have a huge impact on our behavior, but what are some of the other factors at play?
Yeah, like what are the underlying ingredients that make us tick?
Well, our sources point to a few key elements.
Okay, let's hear them.
First up, we've got the actions and characteristics of others. We're constantly reacting to what people do, how they present themselves, even their backgrounds. For example, you're more likely to help someone who appears to be visually impaired cross the street.
That's interesting. I've never thought about it like that, but it makes sense.
It's because their need triggers a compassionate response in you.
Makes sense. Our sources also talk about cognitive factors, basically how our thoughts, beliefs, and memories filter how we see the world.
Oh, yeah, like if you believe that a certain group of people is lazy, you might interpret their actions through that lens, even if their behavior has nothing to do with laziness.
It's like we see what we expect to see.
Exactly. Our preconceived notions can really cloud our judgment. And then there are environmental factors too, things like heat noise, crowded spaces.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on crowded spaces.
They all affect us more than we realize.
You know what? I'm way more irritable on a hot and humid day. It's like my brain just can't function.
I hear you. And then we've got sociocultural factors.
Okay, so like the groups we belong to, cultural norms, values, all that stuff.
Precisely. All of those things play a huge role in shaping our behavior. For example, in some cultures, direct eye contact is considered disrespectful, while in others, it's a sign of respect and engagement.
It's amazing how much culture can influence something as simple as eye contact.
Right. And we can't forget about biology, too. Our genes and inherited traits can influence our temperament and impulsivity, which in turn affects how we act.
So it's like a combination of nature and nurture.
Exactly. It's a recipe for human behavior with all these different ingredients coming together in unique ways.
It's fascinating to think about. It makes me wonder, which of these factors do you think has the strongest impact on your own behavior?
That's a tough one. I think it probably varies from person to person and depends on the situation. But I've always been intrigued by the concept of interpersonal attraction.
Oh, yeah. What makes us click with some people and not others?
Exactly what drives our preferences. How do we decide who we like, trust, and want to be around?
It's like a social mystery.
Our sources mention a technique called sociometry.
Sociometry. What's that?
It's a way to measure the attraction and even repulsion between people in a group.
Oh, wow. So it's like mapping out the social dynamics.
Exactly. It's a really insightful method. Basically, group members get to choose who they'd prefer to work with and who they'd rather avoid.
That's pretty cool.
And this technique has been used in all sorts of fields, from leadership studies to research on social adjustment. It's even been used to identify prejudices within groups.
Oh, so it's like having a secret decoder ring for social interactions.
Kind of. Speaking of social dynamics, let's talk about conformity.
Oh boy, that's a big one.
It's everywhere, isn't it?
It really is. So what exactly is conformity anyway?
Conformity is the tendency to adjust our behavior or thinking to match the norms of a group.
So like going along with the crowd even if you don't agree?
Yeah, that's one type of conformity called compliance. Then there's conversion, where you actually change your beliefs to match the groups. And finally, there's congruence, where your beliefs already align with the group's.
So it's not just about doing what everyone else is doing. It can also be about changing your beliefs to fit in.
Exactly. And conformity can be a good thing sometimes.
How so?
Well, it can foster social harmony and cooperation, which are essential for any society to function.
I guess that makes sense. But isn't there a downside to conformity too?
Oh, absolutely. It can definitely stifle individuality and lead to groupthink, where everyone just blindly follows the leader, even if it's a bad idea.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And then there's nonconformity.
It's like being a rebel.
Well, it can be.
Hmm.
There's independence, which means sticking to your beliefs even when they're different from the group's. And then there's anti-conformity, where you actively oppose the group's norms even if you secretly agree with them.
So sometimes going against the grain is a good thing, and sometimes it's just being difficult for the sake of being difficult.
It all comes down to the motivation behind it. And that brings us to the concept of social mobility.
Social mobility. Okay, so this is about how people move up or down in society.
Exactly. Think about it. Your level of conformity, your willingness to challenge the status quo, these things can have a real impact on your social standing.
Wow. It's like we're all playing this elaborate social game.
Kind of. We're all trying to figure out the roles and find our place.
And sometimes we conform because we genuinely believe in what the group stands for, and sometimes it's just because we want to fit in.
It's a complex mix of motivations. Have you ever found yourself conforming even when it didn't feel quite right?
Oh, totally. I think we all have. It's part of being human. But this brings up a crucial question. How can we design social structures that actually encourage positive behavior, and actually help people live better lives?
That is the big question, isn't it? It's like the holy grail of social engineering, and our sources point to values and norms as being super important.
Values and norms. Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. So values are those big abstract ideas that a society holds dear, things like honesty, fairness, compassion. The good stuff.
Okay, so like the guiding principles.
Exactly. And then norms are the specific rules and expectations that kind of like stem from those values.
So norms are like the how-to manual for living in a society.
Yeah, you could say that, for example, if honesty is a core value, then a norm might be don't cheat on exams.
Okay, so values are like the big picture, and norms are the everyday guidelines.
Precisely. And it seems like our sources are saying there's a direct link between these three things: values, norms, and individual behavior, like a chain reaction.
So if we want to encourage more positive behavior, like actions that benefit everyone, we need to focus on shaping those values and norms.
Right. And our sources suggest that positive reinforcement is key here.
Okay, so like rewarding good behavior.
Exactly. Think about it. Rewards, praise, social recognition, they can go a long way in shaping people's actions.
It's like we're training humans for goodness.
In a way, yeah. It's about creating a system that encourages and supports pro-social behavior. And speaking of shaping behavior, our sources also highlight the impact of child rearing practices.
Oh yeah, different parenting styles can totally make a difference.
Absolutely. They create different social environments, which in turn influence a child's development. For example, authoritarian parents. They tend to be strict and demanding, often raising kids who are obedient but maybe struggle with independent thought.
Whereas authoritative parents who set boundaries, but are also warm and responsive, tend to raise kids who are more confident and socially skilled.
Exactly. It highlights how crucial those early years are in shaping who we become. But, we can't talk about social structures without talking about conflict.
Yeah, conflict is bound to happen no matter how perfect a society we try to create.
And that's where Gandhi's concept of satyagraha comes in.
Satyagraha. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
It's a philosophy of nonviolent resistance rooted in truth and determination.
So instead of fighting back with violence, you resist peacefully and with integrity.
Exactly. It's about standing your ground, but doing so in a way that respects your opponent and aims to find common ground.
That sounds incredibly difficult, but also incredibly powerful.
It is. And the amazing thing about satyagraha is that it can be applied to conflicts of all sizes, from personal disagreements to international disputes.
So it's like a universal tool for resolving conflict peacefully.
Exactly. And this ties back beautifully to the idea of building a positive social structure. A society that embraces nonviolent conflict resolution is laying the foundation for a more just and harmonious world.
It's about creating a culture of empathy and understanding, even when there are disagreements.
Precisely. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the psychological factors that drive our behavior to how social structures can shape our choices. What are your biggest takeaways so far?
I think the thing that's hitting me the hardest is how interconnected everything is.
Mm.
Our individual actions, the groups, we're part of the values of our society. It's like this giant web of influence.
It really is, and it raises a really important question. If our social surroundings have such a powerful impact on us, what responsibility do we have to create positive and supportive environments, not just for ourselves, but for everyone?
It can feel a little overwhelming, like what can one person really do?
That's a valid feeling. But the truth is, we're not powerless. We can each choose to be forces for good in our own lives and in the world around us.
So it's not just about understanding why we act the way we do, but about using that knowledge to make a positive impact.
Exactly. It's like social psychology meets social activism.
I love that. And it all starts with each of us. By cultivating empathy, challenging our own biases, and promoting values that support a positive lifestyle, we can make a real difference.
I completely agree. It's about recognizing that we're not just passive recipients of social influence. We have the power to shape our own behavior and contribute to a more just and compassionate world.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about how much power we actually have when it comes to shaping our own behavior and the behavior of others.
It really is. And speaking of amazing things, I'm curious, what are some of the most surprising things you've learned in your exploration of human behavior?
That's a good question. One of the things that always fascinates me is just how adaptable we are as humans. Like we're constantly evolving and changing in response to our social environments.
It's true. We're incredibly resilient.
And that adaptability means that we have this incredible potential for both good and bad. We can be so kind and compassionate, but we're also capable of some pretty terrible things.
It's like we have this duality within us.
Exactly. It's like that saying, we're each capable of the best and the worst. It makes you wonder what tilts the scales. What pushes us towards one end of the spectrum or the other.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a complex interplay of factors, but one thing that really stands out to me is the power of social norms.
Oh yeah, those unwritten rules that guide our behavior.
Exactly. If a society really values and rewards pro-social behavior like kindness and cooperation, it creates this ripple effect.
Yeah.
People are more likely to act in those ways when they know that their actions are appreciated and reciprocated.
It's like a positive feedback loop.
Precisely. It creates a virtuous cycle leading to greater well-being and harmony within the society.
That's such a hopeful thought. It means we have the power to create a better world, not through some grand sweeping changes, but through these small, everyday acts of kindness and compassion.
Absolutely. It all adds up.
It's about fostering a culture where people feel encouraged to do the right thing, even when it's hard.
I love that. And it's not just about understanding human behavior, but about actively shaping it.
It's about making conscious choices that create a world that reflects the values we believe in.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and using that knowledge to build a more just compassionate and fulfilling world for everyone.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with this thought. If we can create a society that truly values and rewards pro-social behavior, things like kindness, compassion, cooperation, imagine the incredible impact that could have not just on individual happiness, but on the progress of society as a whole.
It's something to think about for sure.
It is food for thought as we all navigate this complex social world we live in. So that's it for today's deep dive, folks. But remember, the exploration of human behavior and how we can create a better society never really ends.
It's an ongoing journey of discovery.
Exactly. So keep those minds curious, keep those hearts open, And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of, you guessed it, human behavior.